All right. So our next speaker is Iason Gabriel, a philosopher and senior staff research scientist at Google DeepMind, where he leads the Humanity, Ethics, and Alignment Research Team, or HART. Gabriel's work focuses on the ethics of artificial intelligence, including questions about AI value alignment, distributive justice, language ethics, and human rights. More generally, he is interested in the relationship between AI and human values, and in ensuring that technology works well for the benefit of all. Before joining Google DeepMind, Gabriel taught moral and political philosophy at Oxford University and worked for the United Nations. In 2024, Time magazine named Gabriel one of the 100 most influential people working in the field of AI. Iason Gabriel's talk is titled A Matter of Principle, AI Alignment as the Fair Treatment of Claims. Great.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. I have to say I'm trying not to blush from that introduction. It was a little much, but yes, I have been working on these questions of AI ethics and philosophy for a couple of years now, and today I will talk to you a little bit more about this question of value alignment that Peter has done such a wonderful job introducing. So we will start in the beginning, if I can get this to work. Which I cannot. Oh, I can. Thank you. So the big question is, of course, what is value alignment? And I think there's relatively stable agreement that the challenge of value alignment involves trying to get AI systems to align with the right set of values such that they do what they ought to do and avoid imposing unjustified harm on others. So this decomposes into two parts. One is the technical question, which is the how can you get an AI system to do what it ought to do, whether that's aligning with a value or fulfilling a certain goal. And the other is the normative question, which is what value or goal should we give AI systems? And if we stay in the domain of the normative, we can think of thick or ambitious goals and thin or minimal goals as being juxtaposed against one another. So we might say, well, you know, the goal of alignment is just to align with human intentions or to avoid like a catastrophically bad outcome. And on the other hand, on the thicker side of things, we might try and have a fuller specification of what we actually want AI systems to do in a range of different contexts. And so today I'll be talking about a fuller picture of value alignment. And I think that's important because we face these hard choices with AI all across the board, whether we're thinking about very powerful agents that could be deployed in the world that have general capabilities, or we think about autonomous vehicles or recommendation systems. We see these value questions coming up all over the place, and we basically need guidance about what to do. And the final thing I'll say about the kind of like big picture stuff is that ideally, I think a theory of value alignment would also have explanatory power. So once we know this theory, we would also understand more about our real world reactions to certain kinds of AI deployment and why it is we think that some are acceptable and some are problematic. So if we take very famous kind of candidate answers to the alignment problem, probably the most prominent one is this idea of intent alignment, which you've heard people speak about today. And there the idea is that AI should be aligned usually with its developers' intentions or sometimes with the user intentions. And I think the question we always have to ask there is, you know, this is clearly an important goal. It's a very, very important technical question. But is that enough? Does it give us a full enough answer to the value alignment picture in practice? And it seems that it's kind of riven by inadequacies and ambiguities at different junctures. So the first question is, whose intention does the AI system need to be aligned with? I've already equivocated between the user and the developer. Clearly, these are different actors, and they can have different interests and different goals that pull in different directions. The second question is, should an AI system always be aligned with an intention? As we know, many intentions are harmful, as evidenced by malicious use. Or I could even have an intention to harm myself. And then the question is, should the AI system acquiesce in that? Should it help me self-harm? Or should it actually be predicated upon something else? And so this leads to the further question, which is this language of intentions really going to allow us to fully populate the moral space of things we care about? And many people think that the answer to that is essentially not. So the next kind of big alignment paradigm, which I think has gained a lot of traction in the field and has actually been invaluable when it comes to aligning modern, complex, powerful agents with language use, is what we call the HHH paradigm, or the helpful, honest, and harmless formula, which Amanda Askell and her colleagues pioneered, and which we often use reinforcement learning with human feedback to evidence in practice to make these agents kind of approximately more ethical. And so I think that this is moving closer to the kind of like rich value alignment paradigm that we want, but it still encounters a number of problems. So the first of them is to do with trade-offs between values and trade-offs across people. Right? So it's very obvious that there can be situations in which an AI being extremely honest will not equate to it being harmless, and we'd have to weigh the two values against each other. And if we think about the role of algorithms, say, in economic or social life, we often have to make trade-offs between groups of people, right? So who are you going to help and who are you going to harm? So this is a kind of useful heuristic, but it doesn't get us very far in terms of understanding what we need to understand. And so we have to dig deeper and say, well, what is the justification for foregrounding one value in one situation and one value in another? And there's different ideas that have been offered there. If you dig into the kind of value alignment papers and the philosophical research, actually, Amanda Askell and her colleagues suggest that maybe the basis is something utilitarian. So what we really want is the AI system to do the greatest good for the greatest number of people. And when it comes to trade-offs, we just steer towards that general goal. And that's an idea that has a lot of currency in moral philosophy, but is famously not acceptable in public life. So normally when you just say, okay, we're going to build something that's utilitarian, there's immediately questions about what happens to the people who are on the kind of the losing side of that equation. And what if there's some very large diffuse benefit that can be achieved, but someone has to be like extremely acutely harmed to achieve it? Is that an acceptable outcome? So most people kind of don't want to go down that path, and they think that we encounter this kind of justification problem, which is like, okay, well, how are we going to move forwards? And that's particularly important when we think that what we're building are very powerful technologies, because that means that the principles that they're aligned with are going to have very profound ramifications for us in our lives. And if we don't have an opportunity to shape and input those principles, we can plausibly claim that we're being dominated, which is, in political philosophy, a very serious problem. In the real world as well, I should add. Okay, so this is a situation to be avoided. And the question is, how do we do it? And I think the answer is probably through a different set of approaches, which I term fair process-based views. And so the fair process-based approach says, look, we live in a world in which there's people who hold pluralistic values, right? So we're probably not going to be able to discover the truth about morality, and even if we did, there would still be disagreement among ourselves, right? Some people think they actually know the truth about morality, but most of us can see that we're in this kind of reciprocal situation where no one has the right to insist on their way being the one and only. So we're not going to get to this kind of moral or metaphysical consensus, so let's just try to come to a fair agreement. And then the question is like, well, what does a fair agreement look like here? And there's different ways of modeling it. In social choice, democratic theory all have options. But the way I'm imagining is that we propose different principles to govern an AI system. Maybe anyone has the right to propose a principle. And then we weigh up the different claims that people have against different sets of principles. So I might say, I think that the AI system should do this and it should allocate rewards in this way. And then someone could say, well, I have this strong objection that this will kind of harm my livelihood or infringe upon my liberty. If we do this other principle, we get a better situation in which there's less objection and less harm. And eventually this, through a process of collective deliberation, could lead us to a situation where we get principles that are endorsed and that reflect this fair balancing of claims. So, moving forwards, I know that's very high level and very abstract. I want to talk a little bit more concretely about what this could mean. And so I want to talk a bit about agents and stakeholders. So, my idea is that you have a claim on an AI system if it has a profound effect on you. So the question is, well, who is profoundly affected by AI systems? And I think that, this is just a model. In reality, the situation is more complicated, but we can look at users, developers, and societal constituencies as different groups who usually have claims on how AI systems operate. So the AI system is the entity which has the behavior that needs to be governed, and these different groups need to strike a balance, and a kind of moral and equitable balance with regards to how the system operates in the wild. And what's interesting about this is that it really expands the kind of aperture of what we think successful alignment, unsuccessful alignment looks like. And so in a paper I just authored with a bundle of colleagues, but in particular Jeff Keeling and Ariana Manzini, on the ethics of advanced assistance, we outlined this tetradic view of misalignment. And the tetradic view says that an AI agent is misaligned if it unduly does a range of things. And here unduly means deviating from the fairly chosen principle. So we can think of the fair principle as the ideal trajectory. And when the AI system deviates from it, it will typically favor one group over another. And what's interesting about this is we can account for all the classic forms of misalignment. So an AI agent that favors itself at the expense of the user, maybe engages in reward hacking or specification gaming, is misaligned. An AI agent that favors itself at the expense of society, maybe by passing on some kind of externality that is not very harmful to the individual, but is collectively destructive, adding it to misinformation, for example, is also misaligned. But then we start to see that there's many other ways in which an agent can be misaligned, which actually fit with our kind of normal reflections about what an ethical AI system is. So on this account, if an AI agent unduly favors the user at the expense of society, it's misaligned. So there we can think about maybe someone engaging in malicious use. Or if it unduly favors the developer at the expense of the user, it's misaligned. So we might think that the developer has kind of indexed too heavily on their own goals, and maybe they're manipulating the user, which would be a problem according to this theory. There could also be situations in which the AI system unduly favors the developer at the expense of society. And there's a final set of, in fact, there's more iterations, as the mathematically minded of you will realize, with 4 actors, but these are the ones that I think are the most salient. The final one for now is a situation in which the AI agent unduly favors society at the expense of the user. And we could think of that maybe in terms of the legitimate interest and freedom of the user. So if the AI agent becomes unduly censorious, maybe because it has some kind of societal goal in mind, maybe something like national security or something else, then again, the boundary would not have been drawn in the right place, and we could rightfully say that the AI system is not value aligned. So I think that this view has a number of potential advantages. The first is that the principles that would be outputted would be context dependent. So if you think about, say, the regulation of a system of autonomous vehicles in the context of a city, the relevant stakeholders would be people who are affected in that context. Presumably drivers, pedestrians, people who use public infrastructure. And we would weigh the force of claims, as people do in public deliberations, to come up with principles that are appropriate for that action case. In, say, a criminal justice setting, the stakeholders are different and the principles would be different. And hence we would get set that would strike this balance differently, which is also something that the algorithmic fairness literature has shown us. So we get this context and completeness, which is useful. In theory, for every set of principles, we have an appropriate justification, which can be given to the people who are affected, which is it satisfies the strongest set of agreed upon claims as agreed by the collective. And I believe that it has explanatory power in the sense that when we think about what's going wrong with an AI system in real life, take anyone that comes to mind, you'll usually find that there is some kind of disproportionate favoring going on, and hence a kind of unjustified harm that attaches to it. So just to conclude, there's a couple of open questions. In fact, there's a lot of them. The first is to do with theory and practice. So this is still clearly quite an idealistic account of value alignment that I provided you with. I think ideals are important because they help us kind of measure the distance from where we are now to where we need to get to, and to identify when things are occurring that are wrong in the world. But people obviously want to know, well, what does this mean in practice? And so the first thought that people have is often, well, what about justly authored laws? They sound a lot like these principles that I've been talking about. And I agree. I think if a law is justly authored in a democratic society, it basically serves this function, and people who transgress laws normally do so in a self-favoring way. So this leads us to the kind of obvious and correct conclusion that AI systems should obey the law when they're justly authored. But of course, the law isn't expansive enough to cover all the kinds of dilemmas that we encounter with algorithmic systems. There's many areas where AI systems could operate, but we just don't think it's appropriate for the law to intrude. So in our personal lives, for example. And so what I think we need is actually probably something more like these alignment forums or deliberations to help us populate this territory and understand what it is that we think the AI system ought to do. And I think once we know what this normative territory consists in, we might find that the technical challenge is not as acute as we thought. It's often that we have normative uncertainty leading to technical confusion. So, I mean, you can see this in the context of like criminal justice and fairness. When we know what we want the algorithm to do, then it's easier to build those kind of algorithms. The second question is, like, is alignment always required? What about in, say, a research setting where the AI system isn't really affecting anyone, like I'm talking about interest and profound effects? And I think that it's possible that alignment is, less important in those cases. If you can find me a case where an AI system doesn't affect the world, then we might be outside of the world of alignment protocols. But in reality, alignment is usually important, and it becomes very, very important for very powerful systems. So I think this again is a theoretical account that's giving us the right kind of practical conclusions. And then the final thought actually really leads into the sort of thing that Peter was talking about, which almost makes me wish that this had been the first presentation, but we'll see. Maybe they can rejig it in the replay, which is, we have this tetradic setup with the four actors, and I really treated the AI agent as the subject of an alignment protocol, right? So I said the AI agent is not allowed to pursue its own goals at all, in as far as they deviate from the thing that has been collectively agreed upon. Of course, if AI agents cross over some kind of barrier, which I don't believe they're close to, they could become moral stakeholders, right? It could be wrong to kind of instruct them to do certain things. And the question is, well, how does that fit with the account that I presented here? Does it break it, or is there a way of accommodating this insight? And I think there's a way of accommodating it, which is if AI agents had that standing, they would have claims, but we would still have claims upon them. Right, and so they themselves will become stakeholders in an alignment process, but the result would still be principles which aim to treat all parties fairly. And so, so that's what I'm advocating for now. I hope it's interesting and illuminating to those of you who haven't come across this material before, and I'm very happy to take questions.
Anyone at the table can go ahead.
Hello. It says risk of auditory injury, so I'm not sure what's going to happen now. But very quick question. So, based on what you just said, I don't see how we can. I mean, just correct me if I'm wrong here, but I don't see how they can ever really have any agency or should be treated as having any agency unless we're going to give them some form of rights. In a human rights sort of way. And I think that's a dangerous path for us to be going down completely. I think we're over-anthropomorphizing what they are. They should be dealt with as a tool for us. And what do you think about that?
I can see. I see, thank you. So it's a very good question. So I think the account that I presented is meant to kind of be able to regulate something as simple as an algorithmic system that has very little agency and extend all the way to agents that take action in the world. Here we're not talking about moral agents. Moral agents would be the final step. But actually the thing that got me thinking about this kind of tetradic relationship was the idea of agents taking actions that clearly affect other people. I think this is something that becomes really apparent when we move beyond the kind of conversational agent and chatbot interface, where you can think that it's just a person and the AI interacting. Clearly agents that take actions in the world can potentially create irreversible effects, real harms for people. And that's where the big kind of catalyst started to move around, and I was like, okay, then we need to understand how these effects rank against one another. And hopefully it is a theory that generalizes to cover these three different situations, but definitely needs to be finessed a little more.
Hi, I'm here at the back, sorry. So I love this, and I want to pose two challenges, and I hope that they can be well addressed, so I'm sort of playing devil's advocate. The first challenge is, does it work? The second challenge is, does it matter? So on the does it work question, so as many people that are familiar with moral philosophy will know, the problem of contractarian theories, of process-based theories, is quickly that it seems to allow substantive criteria by the back door. So if we're creating a process-based argument, right, assuming that we don't know what the right answer is, but we'll create the right process to get to an answer, and by virtue of the process being right, the answer will be right, who's going to be in the room, right? Why those four agents or those four entities, are they equally represented? Once you know who's in the room and how they're represented, do we take their stated preferences as determinative, or do we take their objective interest as determinative? And so on and so on. So there are all these questions, and I'm curious how you address that point. Secondly, does it matter? So in the context of autonomous vehicles, right, we've spent like decades arguing the trolley problem, like would you rather kill one person or would you rather swerve and avoid killing five? What a real-life scenario where we won't just sort of obviously know the answer, because no matter if we're Kantians or utilitarians, if we're from the north or the south, we sort of all agree that there's an obvious right thing and wrong thing. What are examples where we'll actually have substantive moral disagreements that can be answered in this way?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, two excellent questions. So the first one was it was not the does it matter, it was the how does it work question. What was the first one? Does it work? Yes, thank you. So the question was about the potential for this just to be like another substantive argument, i.e. another account of a kind of this is a true moral theory in disguise. And I think that it's true that it does make substantive assumptions. So we have to accept that we live in a world where other people have valid complaints that they can make against us. And there is a kind of tacit supposition of the moral equality of persons and this idea that we have to live together in community. I don't think that's the same as giving a kind of a full account of a moral theory, because there's so much that's still left to negotiate within the bounds of what this kind of basic equality supposes. In terms of how it would work in practice, the version of the argument that I developed more in a paper that will hopefully soon be out really builds upon the all-affected interest principle. So the vision I have is that essentially the deliberation has a variable scope, is non-exclusionary. And I think that people should be able to make claims in their own voice. So we shouldn't say you have to do this very technical, analytic, philosophical thing. Really, people can speak in the way that they do speak about AI. They can say this one is like infringing my rights, or this one, I deserve an explanation, you know. And I actually don't think it's a huge distance between understanding what people are saying and the force of the claim that has in relation to an AI system. So that's the kind of a little bit more about how I think it could be operationalized. Of course, if the AI system is very important, has huge stakes, then we may need some kind of full public consultation, as we would do in, say, a matter of healthcare policy. If it's something more minor, then maybe we can do something more approximate, you know, just to get an idea of the right direction. So again, there can be variation and experimentation there, and I'm excited to see that there is that experimentation taking place with the whole democratic AI agenda that we will see some presentations on. On the does it matter question, just to get everything in order, I mean, I think, sorry, can you remind me why it doesn't matter?
Like, we can disagree about moral theory like all day long, right? And we'll probably never get anywhere because philosophers never have. So, you know, maybe.
I remember. Yes, yes.
Like, what are actual scenario where like this kind of thinking will come down to reasonable disagreement that we have to adjudicate through a deliberative process?
Yeah, so I think basically every instance of algorithmic justice that has been satisfactorily addressed in the real world has been addressed through a process of collecting feedback from affected parties, reinterpreting the design principles that the AI system is based upon, and then creating something that treats people equitably. So there's many examples. Of course, there's like the criminal justice examples, there's healthcare examples, things like that. And so my belief is that this can be done. Jonathan Stray actually has a beautiful paper on recommendation systems. So in that context, people often think about the different claims of different parties. And I think it does lead to something that's very practicable and workable and fits with our idea of what it means to be, compatible with values in the real world.
We have time for maybe one really quick question.
I don't know how quick this will be. I had a question about the survivability of this system through superintelligence. And, sort of assuming the AIs at some point become moral actors, as our value to them diminishes, how is the value of humanity maintained in the ethical system? Does it potentially involve some of the great apes, the self-aware chimpanzees, for example? Are they included in how an AI would think about non-AI entities morally? What's the moral justification for drawing the line at just below human level intelligence and not somewhere else?
So it's a wonderful question, and it raises the important kind of a question by extension of who the affected parties are. And so just to be clear, the tetradic setup that I used here was only for illustrative purposes. The affected parties could be very, very diverse, right? So presumably it will be people not just in our country, but living overseas. It could also be non-human animals that have a strong claim to welfare treatment. It could be people who haven't been born yet. And so this is a kind of, this is a system that's meant to be able to incorporate all of these things. Of course, if AGI exists, but by hypothesis, you said it would have like a moral standing. So that could well be true, but it wouldn't diminish the moral standing of other people, right? And other non-human animals that have moral standing. So the question of whether it would practically respect these things is really, I think, more of a design question. Can we make it do that? That's a technical problem. But should it do so? The answer I would say is like clearly yes, because its kind of additive, like moral value, doesn't detract from the value that other entities have. Thank you.
All right, let's thank Iason again.